Welcome to Today Geopolitics, and when we are discussing one of the most critical issues in EU foreign policy, it is the security challenges in Arctic after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. My name is Pedro Montoya, and I am an EU researcher policy at Vocal Europe. I am thrilled to be joined by a distinguished guest who brings with her a wealth of experience and knowledge in this topic. I would like to introduce Ms. Marie-Anne Coninsx, Senior Associate Fellow at the Egmont Institute, Honorary Fellows of Wolfson College, and a member of the Board of Directors of the International Polar Foundation. She has been an EU official for 35 years and the first EU ambassador for the Arctic. Thank you, Ms. Coninsx, for being with us today.
Thank you very much.
Ms. Coninsx will share his insights on the security challenges in the Arctic region and the role that the EU can play as a geopolitical actor in this regard. So let's get started and explore this topic. First, we have the Sweden and Finland entries into NATO in sight. And what kind of reaction could this provoke in Russia's Arctic policy? Do you think it could enhance deterrence or rather escalation of the tensions?
Thank you very much, Pedro, to give me the occasion to speak on this important topic, which is really very actual for the moment. Regarding, I would first maybe say a word about the accession or the possible accession of Sweden and Finland to NATO, which I think is absolutely the right decision. It's a very important decision. And I was listening to an interview with the head of the Finnish defense, the army, a four-star general, and he was saying that the only language that Russia understands is hard security. And therefore, this decision of Finland and Sweden will definitely reinforce NATO and will be key for Arctic security. Now, what kind of reaction that will be from Russia? In the first place, I don't think that in general, Russia was expected the outcome when they invaded Ukraine. They were probably expecting that they would lose very easily, and then the West would react like in 2014 with very minor sanctions, and they could go on. So I think they have been very much surprised by the very strong reaction, the unity by the West, and that is something. And one of the results is also this unity is not only to support Ukraine, but also to reinforce NATO. Now, will that affect Russia's Arctic policy? In practice, I don't think it will change Russia's Arctic policy, because for Russia, the Arctic has always been a number one strategic priority, and security priority, and also economic. And if you had a look at the new maritime doctrine of Russia of July 2022, so after the invasion of Ukraine, but still very, very recent, also there Arctic is defined as an area of strategic military and economic confrontation with the US and its allies. So that there is a possibility of tensions, increase of tensions is clear. Also to stress that already before 2014 and since 2014, Russia has been increasing considerably its military capabilities in the Arctic, and you know that they have very, very strong nuclear submarines capabilities in its Arctic. So I think it will not change Russia's Arctic policy, but it will only reinforce the security and the military focus. Now, will that have an effect will that enhance deterrence? I would say yes, from both sides. It will have a deterrence effect, I would say, for Russia, that already in 2022 was having nuclear exercises in the Barents sea to show that it's a nuclear power and that it has nuclear deterrence. But with the action of Sweden and Finland, plus the unity of of NATO and the increase of military capabilities in northern countries, that will also be a way to deter Russia to continue with its activities.
Yeah. Thank you. And I think that the Russian invasion of Ukraine could lead to a new security paradigm, especially in Europe. Indeed, the EU foreign policy for the Arctic has not been maybe very ambitious so far, or has kept more a low profile. How should this paradigm shift affect EU foreign policy? Should the EU be more concerned with the security of the region and act as a more classical geopolitical actor?
Yeah. The answer to your question is definitely yes. The European Union should be much more concerned about the security in its high north. And this I have been saying when I was already EU ambassador for the Arctic, and afterwards I have been participating at conferences specifically dealing with security in the Arctic. And it is an area where also I think that NATO, after 2014, it has been neglected by NATO, and people were extremely reluctant in all these discussions and conferences to address security in the Arctic, particularly because in these conferences, everybody was speaking about the Arctic spirit, Arctic cooperation should prevail, and we should not speak about possible confrontation, risk, and security. But if you look only at the map of the Arctic, you can see that the European Arctic is extremely vulnerable for military and security risk of Russia. The European Arctic is one of the 4 regions where Europe has where Europe meets Russia. 4 regions. The other regions are the Baltic Sea, the Black Sea, and Belarus and Ukraine. But it's only the European Arctic, one of these 4 regions, where regarding security, the European Union has not paid sufficient attention. And I think that is really necessary. If you look at the EU Arctic policy, the updated one in November in October 2021, before the invasion, it has a more focus, much more than the previous policies, on security and geopolitics. This is something I have been insisting when I was in that function very much. It's not sufficient. It's not sufficient. Europe has to do more. Also, I was struck by the fact when the European Union it decided its strategic compass for security and defense, which it adapted after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine. It's a compass of the European Union as a geopolitical power in defense and security to reinforce its geopolitical power until 2013. There is a very slight reference to the Arctic itself. So I would definitely say that the European Union should be more concerned with the region's security and should be a provider for a real security in the Arctic region as well.
And furthermore, the Arctic governance in overall has been in good health with the Arctic Council at the forefront. But after the war in Ukraine, we have seen a slowdown or a pause in its functioning. Is Arctic governance at risk? Or indeed, recently I read that the Arctic Council members have declared their willingness to continue the Council works, but leaving Russia out. Could it be possible for the Arctic Council to function even without Russia's cooperation?
When you speak about Arctic governments and particularly related to the Arctic Council, in the Arctic Council, you have 8 Arctic states who are members of the Arctic Council, plus the permanent participants, which are representatives of the indigenous people. And for the moment, Russia has the chairmanship. Now, after the invasion of Russia in Ukraine, as you rightly said, the seven others, so the 8 minus Russia, took the decision, to my mind, the right decision, to pause the activities of the Arctic Council. And it's correct because you cannot have a dual track approach. You cannot stop all cooperation with Russia in other fields, but not in the Arctic itself. But as you said, the work of the Arctic Council informally among the 7 Arctic states, so not Russia, has been continued in all areas where it's possible not to have a cooperation with Russia in the Arctic Council. So the work has continued in a certain sense, and we have to see, it will be very important in May of this year, 2023, Norway will become the new chair of the Arctic Council. We have to see what will be the priorities, how they will be handling Russia, but you know that Norway is very strict regarding its position regarding Russia itself. One of the maybe the positive elements of this whole situation is, as I said before, Arctic governments is maybe not exclusively limited to the Arctic Council. And you have non-Arctic states, including Asian countries, but also European ones who are observers of the Arctic Council. Spain is an observer of the Arctic Council. They can play also a very positive role in contributing to addressing the challenges of the Arctic and can contribute it in the work of the Arctic Council. So I would say it's not so dramatic, and also which is often mentioned, that dealing with the Arctic is not only limited to the Arctic Council. For example, if you look at the International Maritime Organization, IMO, they have a polar code. So, and you have within the UN framework, you have the climate change negotiations. All they also maybe more indirectly or directly deal with Arctic matters, Arctic governments, and that is still going on. Now, one element which struck me last week is when I was reading that Russia just has been amending its Arctic policy just in February, where it is given now priority to its national interests by focusing more on developing bilateral relations. And I think here you will speak about China and India, but also strikingly, they have been amending its Arctic policy by removing all reference to cooperation within the Arctic Council. It's really, I mean, it's interesting. This having said, I do not think that Arctic governments is at risk. Of course, it's not functioning, maybe Arctic Council as it should for the moment. There is no other alternative as long as this war with Ukraine is going on. So there are some collateral damages, particularly Arctic Science Corporation. The scientists are complaining, and also the indigenous people, because they were having this official meetings within the Arctic Council, which are not taking place. So this is for them also not an easy position. But I would not say that Arctic governments is at risk.
Yeah, and quite related to this last point that you remark, we have seen other major powers such as China and India becoming increasingly interested in the region. What do you think are the reason behind this? And do you think is there room for everyone in the Arctic? And is the EU's ability to influence the area maybe at risk due to the interest of these countries?
It's correct that there are other countries becoming more interested in the Arctic, not only the countries you mentioned, but also, for example, last week there was an important Arctic conference which took place in Japan. You have particularly the observers of the Arctic Council are more and more interested for different reasons. Now, if you speak specifically about China and India, and particularly China is called a kind of wild card regarding its role in the Arctic. I would say in the first place, they have an economic interest. It's very clear for China. You have the Arctic offers with the warming up economic opportunities. There are enormous rich natural resources in the Arctic, including rare minerals, which are in the Arctic. For China, more than for India, plays a role that you have with the northern sea route, the warming up of the Arctic. The northern sea route will give easier access because of the melting of the ice, a shorter route from Asia to Europe. And they are investing also in infrastructure in the Arctic itself. So there is a huge economic interest from both countries, which cannot be denied. This having said, there is also an interest of these countries and others with relation to climate change. And you have to know that all the observers of the Arctic Council, including China, India, and others, are extremely involved in scientific research to evaluate the impact of the warming up, not only in the Arctic itself, but also in their countries. China is heavily affected by pollution in China because of the warming up of the Arctic, and maybe it's more technical, but by there is a lot of black carbon produced in China, which goes to the Arctic, heats up the Arctic, and has an effect on China. India is very much interested also in the phenomenon of the warming up because it has an effect on monsoons. If you look at India with a large population, monsoons are key for food security. If the prediction of the monsoons is vital for food security. So if these predictions are being changed because of the warming up, India is affected. So they have an interest themselves, China, India, and others, to follow and try to address the challenges of the warming up. And we need countries like China and India if we want to tackle the climate change challenge. A last word on China. I said China is a wild card in the Arctic. It's also because we have seen when China is doing investments, not only in the Arctic but elsewhere, it's not always in full respect, I would say, of transparency and international law order. So that's one of the concerns. And another element, which I heard from a US diplomat, is that it's very uncertain how far China will get involved in Arctic military in the future, because China is already now building nuclear icebreakers and developing new generation missiles. Plus, the big question mark for the moment is what is China's position with regard to Ukraine, and is it more an ally of Russia or not?
Yeah, it's because climate change is basically one of the main issues in the Arctic, and everything it's regarding climate change there. And at the same time, it led to a race for natural resources, and basically this is known as the Arctic paradox. And how should the EU deal with this challenge? And especially since for many countries, it's more an opportunity than a challenge. And
yeah.
This paradox, how do you think that the EU should deal with this?
If you have a look at the EU Arctic policy, past ones and the most recent updated one, addressing the fight against climate change and protecting the fragile environment in the Arctic is absolutely key, central to EU's Arctic policy, beside other elements which I have called them. And this is also reflected in the EU's Green Deal, because also the EU Green Deal has important programs which place in the Northern European EU member states. We have also, the European Union is not only a policy that they have of climate change, addressing climate change, protecting the environment, biodiversity. The European Union is one of the biggest donors regarding research, with Horizon Europe, with its space policies, Copernicus and others, for also research on climate change and addressing it. And particularly the European research is also focusing on innovative technologies, new technologies, to ensure that it's possible to have a green transition in the Arctic. Now I come to the Arctic paradox, what you mentioned. The paradox consists of saying, well, you have such a fragile environment. You have an incredible warming of the Arctic, which has negative effects for the Arctic and around. So should you not stop any economic development in the Arctic? The answer is no. You have 4 million people living in the Arctic, and they want themselves economic development. You have now also these new economic opportunities. I mentioned natural resources, but the rare minerals which are needed for producing electrical cars and other new technologies, you need these. And there is a lot in the European Arctic, because for the moment, for example, Europe imports 90% of these rare minerals from countries where maybe they are less reliable, like China and others. So the question is, can you have both? And the European Union says, yes, but you need a balanced approach. And what is the answer to this? You need to do everything, the extraction, economic development, in a sustainable way. And there I'm extremely confident that among all the Arctic stakeholders, and the European Union is a Arctic stakeholder, because part of the European Union is in the Arctic, or part of the Arctic is in the European Union. The European Union applies the absolute highest standards and norms regarding ensuring that everything takes place in a sustainable way and that the environment is not attacked. And you have really incredible examples. For example, Sweden is focusing on the development, the production of green steel. The production of steel is one of the most polluting in the world. They are having a project for producing green steel. I visited industrial parks in the European Arctic, which are fully circular economy. They apply green energy. So I think the answer to a long answer to your key question is, yes, it is possible that you have both, but as the European Union, you have to do it in a sustainable way and to take into account the right of the people living in the Arctic.
Yeah, and well, and with this remark or recommendation, we end this interview. Thank you very much again for being with us today, and thank you for sharing your insights on this relevant topic. It was very, very interesting. And as a reminder, this interview will be published on all of Vocal Europe's social media platform and on our website as well. Thank you again, Ms. Coninsx.
Thank you very much, Pedro. I enjoyed really the interview.